Okay. Hello, everybody. Hope you guys are doing all right. Share this in my Instagram story real quick. Yeah, so today I think I'm just going to do some figure sketching, maybe even from imagination. Yo, what up, man? Thanks for hopping in. Sorry, I'm just quickly going to share this shit. Okay, cool. Alrighty, hope you guys are doing all right. I don't know what I'm going to do today. Probably be on for just like an hour today. If anyone wants critique or anything, I may or may not do a little critique sesh. Well, we'll see. But yeah. I'm feeling good. Yeah, doing well. My camera up a little bit. Yeah, doing all right. Yeah, I feel like I have a little bit of a cough and some allergies or something, but yeah, doing good. How you doing, man? Oh wait, hopefully my... Nice, man. Are you working on comic books? When learning how to draw faces, where do I go after studying the skull? I'd say that just drawing faces, like I mean, I think that understanding the underlying anatomy in the skull is really important, but it's like one part of drawing faces. Like it's like just understanding the structure, but at a certain point, it really doesn't like help. Like if you're only thinking of drawing the skull when you're drawing a face, you're thinking of like the orbital sockets and the cheekbones and all that stuff. When I draw a face, I'm just like starting with a circle and this like triangle attached to it, you know, and then sort of like building everything else off of that. And then within that, it's like you can easily like start adding, you know, like impression of like eyes and a nose and mouth and stuff. But it's like dependent on your like ability to just, draw things well. I haven't studied the skull in a long time. I really should do more, but um, yeah, it's like I think it's just trying to just draw more faces, like kind of more intuitively. Uh, Bro, I loved your podcast with Marshall. I could listen to him talk all day about art. Yeah, dude, I fucking love Marshall. He's the best. Um, um, but yeah, when it comes to facial expressions, I'm not really great at it. I don't really like drawing facial expressions, but I think it's a lot of the same stuff. Just like I was listening when I was a kid, and I was listening to the guy who animates Plankton from SpongeBob talking about emotions and stuff, and it's like trying to think of the emotion and act out the emotion as you're drawing it within your character. So if you're drawing an angry character, like try to you know make the face yourself. Like if I look like I'm angry, then it's like it gives me like indications of like, okay, yeah, that there's like asymmetry in the mouth here, and then maybe like the nose is more like curled up and scrunched up than it normally is, and then the eyes are you know bunched up. And I think that like if you can channel that sort of energy, you're a lot more likely to be able to draw this stuff. It's like translating the knowledge that you have into drawing skill. It's like you can go and study all of the parts of the eyes and the the nose and all the anatomy of the body, but it's like translating that to skill is sometimes like an entirely different thing. Um, and it takes just practice and just doing it a ton. Um, it like that's like the plight of just being an artist is like you just always need to practice more. It's like a no matter what you're doing, you're like just trying to justify practicing more. For me, I've been like looking at a lot of like Ryan Otley. He's the guy who drew Invincible, the comic art, the comic book, and I've been really into that. I've been really liking it, and I understand a lot about like objective figure drawing, but like when it comes to trying to draw this stuff more like in the way that he does, it's like so much of it is just intuitive. What up, Omnation? How you doing? Good to see you. Um, yeah. I think with yeah, dude, I should get that. His Hulk stuff is so fun. Um, there's so many different things that he does, and I'm just a giant fan of. Um, but yeah, I think with art school and like for me, art school is like useful because it gives you like an idea of what you should learn, but so much of it is just up to you to kind of like go and seek that stuff out yourself. Um, yeah, I'm gonna bring up some Ryan Otley Hulk stuff. Yeah, that stuff is so fun. I don't necessarily want. I feel like he's a little bit more angular than I'd like to be. I feel like I draw with a lot more curves, but I do like how all that stuff looks. Oh, sweet. Yeah, thank you, man. I'm a self-taught artist. What do you feel like art students get taught different from a self-taught artist? I don't think it. I mean, I think the idea of self-taught versus not self-taught is sort of like it's not exactly right. Like, um, And I mean that from the perspective of like you still have access to a bunch of resources, um, and the ability to go and get like critique and stuff online. I think it's just dependent on like maybe like the early exposure stuff that you're kind of starting out when you're younger, or when you're just starting out. Like if you're going to art school, you're going to have someone tell you about Andrew Loomis, and you're going to have someone tell you about George Bridgman and Bern Hogarth. You're going to be exposed to a bunch of different opinions on how to do things. Whereas when you're doing things on your own, you're kind of just going based off your own opinions and thoughts on what you like and what you don't like. Uh, and it's better for some people, not so good for others. And I'd say feedback is probably the number one thing. You just get less feedback if you're doing it self-taught, but you're studying the same stuff. Like I went to an art school, the Watts Atelier, and ultimately, like the work just comes down to you. Like you just have to go and do the work yourself. You have to find that reason to go and do it. And having an art school there just gives you a little bit more structure to be like, okay, yeah, today we're studying ahead. Whereas when you're on your own, you have to be a little bit more disciplined, maybe with it. But the reason I say it's like it doesn't like the idea of being self-taught and not doesn't exactly sit right with me because like you're still going and seeking out advice from great masters and standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's like the idea of being self-taught to me is like being in a cave by yourself, without any exposure to anything else. You know, it's like a yeah. You're saying art school basically exposes you to anatomically correct art styles and teaches you. Not necessarily. I'd say that art school exposes you to just like different opinions. Like again, if you go to art school, you'll be exposed to all the classic figure drawing artists, but then you'll also be exposed to like modern art and like illustration, and you'll have to take art history classes, or you'll have to learn about Bernini, like to even just pass to move on to the next section. It's more of like structured. It's more of a direct curriculum. Whereas when you're doing more self-taught or at least solo teaching, you're having to like figure out whatever that path is on your own. And both of them require a tremendous amount of discipline to get a lot out of them. It's just one is more like you have a bunch of different people giving you opinions versus, again, something that's more specific. Yeah, I've learned that art is very intuitive. You learn the basic rules. Yeah, I mean, I think that like I've talked to a lot of people who didn't go to art school, who they just did some stuff on their own. Like if you are interested in someone who did that very well, I interviewed Greg Broadmoor. It's like my second most viewed video on my channel, where he didn't go to art school. He went to like he was just like a guy in New Zealand drawing for fun, living on welfare, and then eventually just got a job at Weta because he just like figured stuff out and like they could put him to use. And when you talk to people who went to art school, like and went to traditional, very successful art schools, they'll say that most of the work that they did was on their own. You know, they were exposed to again all that like the classes like art history. Some like you even have to take algebra. You know, when you're in art school, you know all these different things. But you know, it's like you, yeah, like. Most of what they're doing on their own at home ends up being their career. Like whether you're a plein air painter and you really love doing that, you end up going and becoming like an environmental concept artist. Or if you're a character designer, you go and become, like if you really love figure drawing, you become like a character designer or some figurative painter or something. But that's like 90% self-study and self-work. I've never interviewed Karl Kopinski. I'd love to. He's, I talked to him about it, but you know, I don't have any reasons to go to England right now, so yeah, just kind of waiting for a reason to do that. And if I guess I could just interview him on Zoom or something. Um, yeah, I think so much of this stuff is just like I wouldn't even call it laziness. I would say it's just interest. Like I like doing these live streams. They're genuinely fun for me to do, but it's also me practicing. It's like I would, again, right now I could theoretically choose to be like, I can go and get a jet ski. I can go rent a fucking jet ski right now and go like have an amazing day riding my jet ski around like San Diego. But instead I'm inside, uh, you know, just talking about art and, you know, drawing with you guys because that's what I want to do. It's like I'd rather be doing this than jet skiing because that's what I've, kind of decided to do. And I think it's like when you listen to people who've become great at the thing that they really are famous for, they didn't do homework. They just like loved chess or they loved playing the piano. They loved painting. They loved engineering. And then they got to a point to where they were so competent at the thing that they were doing that it became that just became their career. They just became insanely good at it. How do you feel about artists who didn't take art school and came out with the same results in a shorter amount of time? I feel like if I was actually committed to art school, this would infuriate me. I think it's great. I mean, I think part of being a person, not just an artist, is like trying to get to a point personally to where you understand that like people are going to progress a lot faster than you. Like you might start way later than someone and progress faster than them, and there's somebody that might start way later than you and progress way faster than you. It's not a competition. There are people that are way younger than me that are much better artists, but it's like that, again, in the same way that there's someone who's like much smarter, much like more successful at the thing they're doing. It's like at a certain point trying to stave off nihilism and being like, oh yeah, what I'm doing is important, even though there is someone doing it at a much better level than me. You're not alone there, my friend. But yeah, it's hard. Like I think like most of this stuff is like trying to understand that you are where you're at. Like, there are people that are, in their early teens that are becoming successful comic artists or concept artists or, going and working on movies as actors and musicians and stuff. And then people that are late into their 50s that are just starting to be an artist. And, they're still going to be able to do great work or not, but it's like, the point of it is not necessarily the accolades or the reception of it. It's to go and just enjoy doing the work. Yeah, it's really not a competition. And I think like among the people that I know the most successful, no one sees it as a competition. It's just like, do your best, even if you are at the top of your industry, you're, the most famous, whatever, there's always some other thing you could be doing that could be, making more money. I've been like talking to Scott Robertson about doing an interview for a long time. I just haven't, we haven't nailed down a time, but I'd like to. I'm going to follow up with him. I'm reaching out to him right now. Sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah. Could you maybe draw a female figure? Yeah. Just give me 1 second. I'll do a female figure. Okay, I sent Scowers another email. So, but yeah, okay. Modern Day James is great. I really highly recommend him. I really admire that guy. He's a really good artist. I really admire his ability to brute force himself into animation and concept art. It's really, really cool. But yeah, okay, female figure. So the way that I draw any figure is, it's very similar to the way I would draw anything. I think whenever you know, drawing a figure is the same sort of thinking across genders or body types or whatever. But you're just changing the shapes up a little bit. Like if I'm going to draw something a little bit more masculine, I'm going to go with like more of like a boxy shape with maybe like a slightly bigger triangle, bigger, like broader shoulders at the top. But I always start with something like this rectangle. Where something that's more feminine, I'd maybe start with like a less broad shoulders and maybe like more bottom heavy. Or just like, like wider hips, more of like an hourglass figure. In the case of trying to draw something that's like, just like absurdly like feminine, absurdly fitting whatever that body type is, I'm going to draw something that's like mostly like, actually, I'm just going to, something that's more like that. Again, more bottom heavy, whereas something that's masculine is more top heavy. Again, but again, thinking of that rectangle shape like this. And you can go into anatomy and pelvis size and all that kind of stuff for this. But for the sake of it, I'm just going to talk about this in terms of shapes. But yeah, so thinking of it that way. And then going through and just, again, thinking of this in the same way I would draw a man, but just trying to be a little bit more intentional with the like femininity and the sort of vibe of the shapes that I'm going for. Gonna go ahead and draw just the breasts. And for this stuff, I'm like wrapping around the form more so than anything. In the case of drawing a man, like if this is a masculine figure on this side, I'm going through and I'm still, again, drawing the rib cage, drawing the pelvis. But instead of breasts, I'm thinking of like the pec. And how, again, that could be wrapping around the underlying form of the rib cage, which is just a cylinder. Or a sphere, sorry. And you're, keeping in mind all the anatomy stuff that you've studied and all that, but you're also just trying to keep in mind shapes and like what does like that shape represent more so than like for the particular kind of thing that you're drawing. If you're drawing a man, you're more likely to like focus on the contour of the anatomy, like thinking of the bicep and the tricep and how the extensor flexor group can be kind of relating to an arm. For a woman, if you're going to draw her arm, you might just use a simple C-curve just to communicate what that line is doing. Because, women tend to be less muscular than men. And I think that, if you want to get better at drawing women, just draw less lines. Like just try to simplify things way more. Um, yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's sort of my like that particular idea can be carried over into a trillion different ways of drawing and painting stuff, but it's trying to be like intuitive and in line with what it means to be drawing like very, very specific character types. Um, let's see. Any uh, any recommendations, books, courses, etc. for comic artists, manga, anime, style art? I'm slightly biased towards this, but I think Proko has a really good course that he did with Marvel, just on like the fundamentals of making comic books. So they go through posing, mannequins, storytelling, basic perspective, like practical anatomy, stuff that's like that's there for the sake of practicality for comics and kind of throwing out all the technical stuff that you might have to you might like have to learn otherwise. It's a couple $100, so it's a little bit expensive, but I think it's worth it. Um, and then let's see. I mean, Andrew Loomis's books, Fun with a Pencil, Creative Illustration, all that stuff is really good. Um, Scott McCloud's book, I haven't read it, but I know that that's a really famous one. Um, and then Marshall Vandruff is a big fan of Little Nemo in Slumberland. What's that? The writer for that is Winsor McKay. Um, it's just like a really great, use of composition and perspective and storytelling just for the, ease of trying to get, images looking, telling stories with images. But yeah, I guess, yeah, overlay Proko Marvel course, Andrew Loomis books, and Winsor McKay. And then, how do you come up with the pose, lol? I waste so much time thinking of a pose midway than actual drawing. I think a lot of that stuff is just like, if you listen to a lot of comic artists talk, like if you listen to Jim Lee lecture or give talks about drawing, he'll talk about how he has like 12 poses that he cycles through, and then he changes them up every time he draws. And for me, it's like a pose that I draw a lot is just like this 3/4, pose of just a mannequin holding a sword or something, because that's just kind of what I like. And when it comes to like inventing interesting poses and doing this stuff more reliably, I think that trying to think of this stuff in terms of again, just simple shapes. Like if I'm going to draw a character that's like kneeling or like sitting at a throne, I'm going to draw something that's more dead on, but thinking of like the primary shapes first. And I'm thinking of the Riley method. It's like a triangle shape, two triangles kind of wedging into each other, but then thinking of how simple lines and S curves and C curves can be used to communicate just like guy sitting in throne. But it starts out with just like a simple shape and a simple idea, and then you kind of go from there. And mileage, just doing an insane amount of it until you feel like you understand it. But it takes a lot of work. And for anyone interested, I have a little course on my Gumroad talking about this stuff, kind of going through gesture and how it relates to like building forms and telling stories and stuff. It's kind of a work in progress right now, so it's not entirely finished, but there are enough lessons in there to kind of go through and kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. But yeah, okay, let's see. I'm catching up on chat. Yeah, the perspective course is good. I definitely recommend it. What's wrong with me? I hate the idea of using digital because inner me tells me it's cheating because I have all these options to warp and destroy my photos. Again, drawing is hard no matter what you do. Art is just one of the most difficult things you could choose to do. And any tools that make it easier for you is totally fine. Like I love drawing digitally. I'm really enjoying it. I'm using a lot of the skills that I've learned traditionally, but it's like, uh, you know, just trying to translate that stuff to digital art. Like I'm drawing in the same way I would draw traditionally. It's just I'm using a pen tablet instead of pencil and paper. I also mostly just draw on a single layer. Like I think you don't necessarily have to take advantage of all those tools. I think it's just like whatever you can get yourself to do more of the stuff. Um, um, but yeah, and again, just mileage, just like they're I don't like that argument that like digital art is less valid or useful than something like traditional art. They're both equally fun and they're both equally useless. It's like there are people that are able to do great things with traditional in the way you can't with digital, and it's just dependent on what you want to do. And when I say they're both equally useless, is like in the wrong hands, they're both equally, you know, hard to do. Um, but yeah, cool. I'm gonna keep drawing these guys. Okay. I want to see the full process. Are you finishing these female figures into actual female drawings? Sure, yeah. I can do a couple female drawings if you would like. Let me do one from reference. I draw recently with references, but when I try to draw from imagination, everything is bad. The idea that I'm just copying makes me feel depressed. Even though I change a lot of things, it's still bad. Yeah, I think one of the harder parts of learning to draw from imagination is just trying to copy it, or to trying to get past that like awkward phase. Because like when you're drawing from reference, you have like the roadmap in front of you. But yeah, when you're trying to like draw from your head, you're kind of just relying based off what you know. And yeah, I think it's like an important thing to do is to just like make, if you want to get better at drawing from imagination, make it a habit. Like unless you're doing that, you'll never actually get better at it. You need to practice it. I'm looking for a figure reference right now for a female. So I am going to draw this from reference real quick. What up, Chase Cottom? How you doing? I think that, so I guess before I start this female figure thing, when drawing anything from imagination, I would say that having a workflow or having a formula for the way that you want to draw is a really important thing for being able to do this stuff reliably. So having a base to start from, something like, a lot of comic artists will do this. Well, they'll do something called like the human core, or just like, just like architectural structure to base everything off of, where it's just like, for me, it's like a rectangle that I start from. Just trying to think of things like this. And then within this, if you want to draw a person, all you have to do is start adding some structure here to start, adding a rib cage and a pelvis and stuff. But you're not thinking of the anatomy. You're not thinking of complex shapes at all. You're just thinking of how primitive shapes are kind of wedging together. And I think that if you're able to like learn how essentially like, if you have a cylinder here wedging into a box, you can very easily start to make that organic when you start to add like line weight and anatomy on top of that. But going back to this figure, drawing this from imagination, applying this here, wrapping around the rib cage, I'm thinking of the pec, but I'm also I'm thinking of it mostly in the way that like a cylinder is being, or a circle has wrapping lines around it. Again, same thing with the like deltoid. If I'm going to draw an arm here, I'm thinking of how, like if I'm have just a circle here, how can a shape be extruded off here to be, to still fit the form? Like if this is a wrapping line around this circle, how is this also interacting with the cylinder here? And a really good exercise to practice is just drawing these sorts of primitive shapes and just kind of seeing if you can relate them together. And the more you're able to like construct basic shapes, you can start thinking of things more representationally. Thinking of this as just like an arm. Thinking of how all these shapes are kind of wedging together and locking together. Eventually you can make a person, And thinking, if you go in earlier on the stream, I'm talking about body types and using shapes to design like feminine versus masculine characters. Using these different ideas to just design different types of characters, different types of shapes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're thinking of like how are these shapes locking together. And Chase, I mean, the people I interview, it's mostly people that I know or people that like had an influence on me in person. So maybe, I don't know. It's sort of a subjective thing. But and for anyone that wants my brush on Photoshop, I have it on Gumroad. So it's like free Photoshop brushes. Are you rotating your pen to get the brush to tilt? Yeah, I am. So like if I'm not going to move my pen at all, but like I'm angling it down slightly and I'm able to get this like fatter stroke. Whereas if I do it at an angle, I'm getting this, line sort of thing. And it's like a custom brush that I use for pretty much everything. Man. I've been drawing for 5 years and I don't have one sketchbook. Yeah, I think that's just part of it. Everyone has their own deficiencies at stuff. Like everyone wants to be good at a specific thing, but it's hard exactly to be great at stuff. I mean, I would love to be better at drawing from imagination and better at rendering. Rendering is not something that I am great at, but you could still be creative with your own perceived deficiencies. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna move to drawing this this figure. So I'm drawing from reference, and I'm gonna do this kind of quickly. So I'm gonna omit a lot of the steps to getting a drawing down accurately. But so I can't include the reference here because it is a nude figure. So sorry about that. So thinking of this, I'm thinking of the gesture first. So what this pose is doing. I'm not really thinking of the like anatomy at all at this stage. I'm thinking of just like that sort of rectangle thing I was thinking of a second ago. So I'm thinking of just like the gesture, what's happening, sort of like on a more like abstract or technical level, and then going through and starting to add something like a rib cage to start thinking of things more three-dimensionally. So thinking of this here, so I can start thinking of how to draw, like in the case this is a female figure, how the breasts can be sitting on there. So wrapping around the rib cage in the same way, again, we're wrapping around just a primitive shape. Wrapping around here. Just like a rough land for what things could look like. And again, I generally tend not to draw that accurately, so it's sort of dependent on what your tastes are. Going through, sort of refining some of the shapes. Adding some more of the anatomy, adding an arm here, deltoid on this side. And because I'm drawing digitally, I generally tend to be a little bit messier in this stage because I can go back on a different layer and throw things back and just refine it a little bit more. And I'm thinking of, if you've never seen me say this or heard anyone else say this, I'm thinking in terms of C, S, and I lines. So what I mean by C line is this arm here could be described as just a C curve, and then another C curve next to that, and then like a straight to represent whatever this hand is doing. And it's like I'm thinking of this stuff not in terms of contour, just in terms of like, how can you use a simple line like this to explain an arm? Okay, and then in terms of like rendering this and making this look a little bit more finished, again, this is a very quick demonstration, so it's not going to be exactly a finish, but going through, refining some of the shapes, throwing this thing back opacity-wise, making another layer, going in with a different brush, bring it back even more. And this is when I can start going through and thinking of this stuff more intentionally. Like, what's a more elegant way of explaining this wrapping around the breast here? There's like an overlap of the breast and the rib cage, just to emphasize this here. Keeping in mind the anatomy, this is sort of where anatomy comes in for me. I have this like rough basin. This right here, this little bump that I put in, is called the iliac crest. It's sort of like the corner of the hip and where like the legs sort of start. It's sort of where the quads and the sartorius kind of separate the quads and the adductors into two distinct muscle groups. But in this case, I'm just going to group them to kind of quickly. And once we have that, the rib cage, or the pelvis is a box. So thinking of this stuff more technically, if we carry this over here, we're thinking of this stuff as, again, primitive shapes. If we have one corner of the box in perspective, we have the other corner because we just have to draw another line over there to find that other line. So now we have that box there. So we do an imaginary drawing of a line over here to get this line for the other iliac crest, the other side of the hip, and then going through into the other hip, being a little bit more intentional with the lines that we're drawing. It's sort of like a lost edge here, but I'm just going to put it in just because. Another line for the deltoid. Being a little bit more refined with the arm. And all the while just trying to simplify things. Dom Gomez asks, can CSI be flipped too? 100%. So yeah, like if I'm going to draw the other arm, like that, I can just flip it and just, as long as we're thinking in terms of 2D shapes, we're thinking of things very simply, we can orient these types of lines in any way we want, as long as we're just trying to think of things simply. Okay, so we're starting to get something like a rough drawing down for this pose. Again, being a little bit haphazard with this just so I can get through this demonstration a little quicker. going through, throwing this in. Very, very rough hand, just more of an indication than anything. And at this stage, we have like the drawing laid in. So this is when we can start like thinking of shadows and, like how is like the value mapping happening on this post specifically. And for that, like, there are two ways of going about it. There's like the sort of, blockier way of thinking about things. So we just go through and throw in a base value. And then we kind of like indicate the shadows just with, just squinting and, separating lights and shadows in a way that just seems correct. So going through and like, like wrapping around this rib cage a little bit. Just getting a clear value pattern and shadow pattern for stuff so we can more easily understand the stuff technically. It's sort of like making it so easy for you to understand that it's hard to make a mistake. And at a certain point, once we feel like we get the value pattern down enough, we can, go through and fill in the shadows and stuff and start, being a little bit more intentional with the rendering, going through and, adding like brighter lights where we think things could go. If I wanted to just copy these layers and then just merge them, we can start blending edges where we think things would be a little bit more blended. And then from here, it's just a matter of like trying to be this is where the hard work comes in, of just trying to figure out where, how things are looking exactly with edges and all that to be a little bit more intentional with stuff. But again, you're thinking of just like, cylinders and cubes and boxes and how they can be lit and rendered in space to maybe, again, to look more representational. If we wanted to go like for a more drawing approach, what you could do is you can go through and use, again, something like your pencil and just kind of outline the shadows. So going through and treating this breast as, a sphere, how is this line wrapping around here? And then how are these shapes relating to get together to kind of, give the impression of rib cage. In this case, I'm gonna, like, the way that I have been trying to think is again, as more of a, comic artist, or more of a, just, thinking of things in terms of primitive shapes. I'm thinking of this rib cage shape as more of a sphere that's being lit like this, versus it being like thinking of it in terms of all the complex anatomy that may or not be there. So again, taking a pretty big creative liberty with how I can simplify it, just for the sake of my own understanding. And again, the beauty of being a creative person is that you can totally do that and have it be a totally valid way of drawing something more representational. There really are no rules to this stuff. Right now it's just kind of going through and squinting my eyes and blocking in where I think the terminator, or like the line where the light and shadows meet, and where I can start kind of being more definite with my line work and how things are kind of being established on a drawing. And again, to finish this, it would take a lot more work and a lot more refinement, but you're just, again, once you have that process down, or once you have that sort of step-by-step method for, like, okay, you start with the gesture, you're thinking of CSI, you're thinking of this rectangle and how that could be warped and changed in space to represent primitive shapes, and then you're using those primitive shapes to represent the rib cage, and then you're using a primitive shape on top of that primitive shape to represent the breast or the pectoralis, the abdomen.
And over time, it builds itself into being a solid figure, but you're kind of bouncing between something like technical, you know, like technical skill as a draftsman, being able to combine primitive shapes and also using your technical knowledge, anatomy, perspective, all that stuff, to be like, okay, this is an instance where I can help push the form, emphasize the form with, wrapping lines or whatever you want to be using. But yeah, that's sort of how I think of all the figurative stuff. But yeah. We going for about an hour or so. Cool. I think I'm going to start slowing down a little bit. I'm going to do a few more drawings, but yeah, if anyone has any more questions, just let me know. My problem with drawing 3D forms is that drawing 3D forms on top of other 3D forms and make it feel like they're always connected. Yeah, well, again, whenever you're seeing anyone drawing, they're thinking of the 3D forms underneath. It just, you do it enough to the point where you can, like, if I'm going to draw just a dead-on pose, like, imagine this is a character facing us. I'm still thinking of how the spine and back is wrapping around, the like the rib cage here, and it's still like it looks like this is a back pose, but if I go through and add a head and a neck and add a pec here, it still works as reading as like the back of the spine, I'm still like, you're using this academic knowledge that you've learned to be able to draw this stuff technically, while also, again, trying to just be more intuitive. And the way you get better at this stuff is just doing it an absurd amount. Like, you start and then you just never stop. Like, I don't feel like I'm a very good artist still, and it's like, it's that's not the point, to feel like you're a good artist. It's just to like have fun doing it. Like, I could still like visualize here. I'm thinking of, okay, so this is the like base lumbar of the spine, kind of going into the sacrum here of the pelvis. If we use the sacrum as sort of like the back of the pelvis, so if this is the sacrum, I'm drawing pelvis here. This is the sacrum looking at us, or the pelvis looking at us. The sacrum would be back here, and the spine kind of connects into that. I'm thinking of the sacrum, and that gives us the back boundary box of the pelvis, and then we can use that to kind of like find the front boundary box. But I'm not thinking of that. I'm not drawing that as I'm working through this stuff. I'm just like, oh yeah, box that. Okay, I've learned this before. I can use this as a case, as a singular instance, to where I can use that little trick of the sacrum being, the edge of the box of the pelvis, to find the rest of the shapes around it, because a box can only exist in one sort of position. And your ability to do that, again, I think is like there are people that would solve that problem entirely different, and yeah, I think it's just like, you do this stuff and you try to solve problems, you try to figure stuff out, and eventually things start compiling. Yeah, here I'll draw the spine with a red line just so you guys can see more definitively. So yeah, so the spine would be following this back rib cage, going back here into the sacrum, but it's like wrapping around the spine, the rib cage, like that. And I'm going to draw this from a back pose just so it's a little bit more definite. You guys can see this maybe a little bit more clear. But, again, thinking of this stuff as just primitive shapes. Sacrum here. Box. and I'm making mistakes, I'm making errors, I'm like doing things in sort of a messy way, but it's like I am confident enough in other things to where those mistakes don't necessarily matter as much. Yeah, so the rib cage here connecting into this. And the sacrum is a really good spot to memorize anatomically on your figures because it's like an instance to where you can start, like a lot of muscles on the body connect there. So the latissimus dorsi connects there as well. And it's an instance where you can separate the rib cage and the obliques all together into just sort of like a singular sort of, you know, sort of shape. And, you know, all those things compound over time to the point where you're understanding this stuff a little bit, maybe more technically. Because I've been used to draw with a heavy amount of reference, I think my eye has developed somewhat, so I see a lot more. I mean, I would say that like depending on what you want to do, drawing from reference and drawing from life, it's like there should be a ratio of both. Like if you want to be a comic artist, I'd say that like, you know, maybe like 30% from reference and then 70% just from imagination. So you're practicing these skills. And if you're like a figurative artist, maybe like 80% drawing from life and, you know, 20% drawing from imagination. It doesn't, like, the ratio doesn't really matter. I think it's like whatever you can get yourself to do. You know, you just keep experimenting with stuff. Cool. Okay, I've been going for about an hour now. I think I'm gonna kind of cool it for today and I'm gonna go work on some other YouTube video type stuff. But yeah, if anyone would be curious about learning from me, I have a mentorship on my Patreon. I think I have one spot left for tier 2. And then if you would like my brush pack, it is on Gumroad. I think all the stuff is linked in the description. And yeah, I also have a gesture course on Gumroad as well. So yeah, if you would like that, please consider picking it up. Thanks guys, and hope you have a good one.